Today is the second day of the question and answer session in Parliament. As per norm, the session takes most part of the week that follows the State of the Nation address, allowing the MPs to engage with the content in the President's speech. This session normally ends with the President answering questions put forward by the MPs in an attempt to create debate on matters that are pertinent to the nation. However, recent years have been characterized by chaotic scenes of violence, name-calling, and amongst those tasked to represent the nation. Professor Pedro Tabensky, the director at Allan Gray Centre for Leadership Ethics, joins us from our Port Elizabeth studios to talk a little bit more about this exact topic that we're referring to when it comes to our Parliament and the behaviour of some of our MPs. A very good morning to you. Thanks so much for being with us here on the programme.
Good morning to you too, and to your listeners and viewers.
Professor, we as South Africans have, over the last few years, observed the most unfortunate behaviour and a trend that our Parliament has deteriorated to. What do you make of all of this? Some people saying it's democracy at play, and others just saying that this is absolutely unruly and unacceptable behaviour.
Yes, I think the behavior is a function of a kind of disenchantment in the current political order, a betrayal, I think, of South Africa by the ruling party. I think that's largely the cause of obviously political opportunism is part of the story as well, but I think the key issue here that's making the difference is a kind of complete cynicism about the current government.
Yeah. So do you blame it entirely on the leadership? If we have to take aside and have a look at what's happening within Parliament, do you think that it's primarily because of the leadership and not necessarily the behaviour of opposition parties? Yes, I would say so. If I was in one of the opposition parties, I think I would be equally incensed and equally. I mean, I would have lost complete respect for our leaders. Yeah, but
in fact, I've even from before the time in which Zuma came into power, I was already starting to become very cynical, particularly over the rape trial.
Yeah, but do you think it's acceptable behaviour? I mean, yes, I understand what you're saying, and that there are differing views, and some people obviously are against some of the things that the President is doing and the leadership is doing. But watching what we're seeing unfolding in Parliament, women being hit, shouting, screaming, interrupting, is this the way things should be run, or is there perhaps another way that we could actually still see the running of our country? Because at the end of the day, this is a very sacred institution where decisions are meant to be made.
Yes, I agree. I would like to take the conversation, if possible, in a slightly different direction, given that I'm a moral philosopher. And I think we need to understand the fabric of our society, and we need to understand what the problems are and to what extent our government is representing us. Because I think the old saying that our governments are, we get the governments that we deserve, has a lot going for it. And so we need to understand, I think, the broader framework within which this situation is emerging, and we need to address that. And I think some gestures were made during the Mbeki regime, for example, when you spoke about the African Renaissance, about thinking about ways in which we can bring a kind of ethical renewal to our country. And I think that's one place where we need to do a lot of work.
Yeah. I mean, we're not...
And it's one of the things that we're focusing on in the centre that I run.
Yeah. We're not unique. I mean, we do see this happening in other parliaments and in leadership circles around the world, whether you talk about Europe, whether you talk about America, you talk about Asia.
Indeed.
And we've seen all these videos circulating now and people saying, listen, we're not alone. This happens all over the world. But I think people just feeling very protective about South Africa and the transformation that we've been through, and saying, but this is not the dream. It's not the ideal of what we had dreamt of in previous years. But I suppose it shouldn't be that way, should it? I mean, these things are natural, and when you look at the psyche and the transformation at play, perhaps that's what we have to deal with.
Maybe. I think we can do better, and I think we need to think about ways in which we can do better. And of course, we shouldn't be measuring ourselves against the global, what's happening around the world, which is terrible, absolutely shocking. I think we need to dig deep into our own history of struggle and liberation, and we need to try to honor that and do something special, and not compare ourselves with the horrible things that are happening in Europe and the US and in my country as well.
Yeah. If we look at what's happening in Parliament and the example that it's setting to other South Africans, do you again think that this is culcating basically a culture of violence within us? Because what we're seeing is violent activity, it's shouting, it's not being able to be rational with one another, so we resort to violence. Is this again putting something into society that doesn't belong there?
Definitely. I think what we see in Parliament is a symptom of what's happening around the country, which is a breakdown in the moral order. I mean, even small things like driving in South Africa in roads, you see the level of violence and the level of a kind of lack of care for the other. Joel Netshitenze, for example, talks about the breakdown of the lack of a social compact in South Africa. And I think there's something really important there that we need to, and we're seeing it expressed in Parliament. So I don't think we should see Parliament as the beginning and the end of a problem. I think we need to think about, again, the moral fabric of our society and the political fabric of our society. And we need to think carefully about what sort of interventions we can make across space, in schools, in universities, and in government, in other spaces that are where we can have an impact, to start to work, to start thinking and rethinking ourselves and our society differently.
Yeah, yeah. You know, your program is also on transformation, grooming tomorrow's leaders. But is that how it works in politics in our country? Because leaders are not chosen on that basis. So how is it relevant for the public sector and the politics of our country? We've got a very different working system.
Yeah, you're right about that. The hope of our initiative is that the change will happen in which future generations of people coming through university, coming through school, will have a different sort of approach to society and to themselves that will hopefully have an impact in the spaces in which they work. So our work is, if you want, thinking about the future, more about the present. Although that said, I think the sort of work that we do, if we did that among politicians, I think, I'm hopeful at least, that would have some kind of impact.
Yeah.
There's very weird things happening. I think one of the things we need to understand is that, and this is something I repeatedly say, that human beings are incredibly weird animals. We think we know ourselves, but we actually don't. And I think we need to start reflecting carefully about how it is that we operate and why it is that we end up acting as strangely as we've been seeing in Parliament, as the behavior we've been seeing and witnessing in Parliament in recent years, and most acutely in recent weeks.
Yeah. Just finally, let's wrap it on this note. I mean, in order for things to change, you know, and I remember this question being posed to our president, Jacob Zuma, saying, you know, why don't you step down for the interest of calm in the country? And his reply to this was, you know, if I step down, it's just going to be the next person that's going to be aimed at, and people are going to take aim at the next president of the ANC and the country, and we're going to have the same thing playing out in Parliament. In your opinion, what do you think it's going to take to bring calm back into Parliament, to bring the sense of debate, of conversation, and back to what we were used to seeing in previous years?
Yes, well, I'm a little bit pessimistic that anything can be done quickly. I think we need to think carefully about training our politicians, actually, about giving them a space where they can start to reflect on why they're doing what they're doing. And we need to break the culture, because I think Zuma's right in a way that he is the product of a culture, a political culture that goes from local municipalities, wards, in townships, all the way up to the state, and all the kind of people who really had if you look at the history of the ANC in the last few years, all the people who really were committed to transformation and a great society have gone, have left government, and we're left with I think with some of the worst elements in society. And I don't think that the solution, and that said, I don't think that the solution is to get rid of the rotten apples, because I don't think the issue here is one of rotten apples. The issue here is of cultures that perpetuate certain type of individuals, and we need to break that culture by engaging, I think, with those individuals in rich and rewarding ways, by showing people the extent to which being ethical, being a good person, is actually in their own interest.
Yeah. Prof, I'm just going to take a break here.
In the interest of society at large.
I'm just going to take a quick break here on the program, but at the same time, I'm going to ask South Africans to engage in this conversation. I think that a lot of interesting things have been brought up here with the conversation with Professor Pedro Tabensky, talking to us about leadership, talking about the state of Parliament. What do you think needs to happen within Parliament? Is it the training of our parliamentarians? Is there more at play here? What do you want to be seeing done in order to change this behaviour that we're seeing on our television screens and the ethics within some of our parliamentarians? We'd love you to join the conversation at Morning Live SABC. That's where you can get hold of us on Twitter. We'll take a break. We'll get hold of those tweets and perhaps we can share them after this. Stay tuned.